Welcome to episode 3 of The Arc of Justice, a new series on Brookline Interactive Group's Big TV. My name is Eric Hyett. My guest this week is Julia Schachnik. Julia graduated from New York University in 2014 with a Bachelor of Arts in Digital Justice, a degree she created herself. She'll be sharing her views as a professional practitioner of diversity and inclusion in the arts. Julia currently works for two Boston area arts organizations, the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge and Brain Arts Org's Dorchester Arts Project. Julia grew up in Brookline. She attended Brookline High School and School Within a School, and she lives here now as well. Julia also believes her Brookline upbringing has affected her career choices and her worldview, so I'm looking forward to asking her about that. Please welcome Julia. Hi, Julia, and welcome. I'm hoping you can share your name and a tiny bit about your connection to Brookline. I ask everybody that, even though I happen to know in your case.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Julia Schachnik. I was born and raised in Brookline, for which for me is 28 years that I've been here. I went to Brookline High School. I went to Lincoln School before that, and I came right back here after college. So I've been here in the community, working, making connections.
That's quite a tie to this town. What's one favorite thing about Brookline that you have?
I love, I think for me, I think the spirit of Brookline has felt the same for the entire time that I've been here. Definitely a social justice oriented town. It's really, especially with Brookline High School, it's where I got involved in social justice, particularly racial justice. And there are so many opportunities to do that here. And that's just always been true. And my family has been involved in racial justice and social justice.
Sorry to interrupt you there. So you said your family's been involved in racial justice and social justice. Do you identify as non-white?
Yes, so I'm from a mixed race Latinx family. I'm the first American in my family. Everyone else was born in Brazil.
Wow.
With a mixed race background, which presented challenges here in Brookline, and in the United States, but a wonderful multicultural background.
That is fascinating. We're definitely going to get into that a little bit more later, but the reason I wanted to have you as my guest today and the reason I'm so excited is because I know that you work in anti-racism and the arts. And I'm hoping you could tell us a little bit about what that means. Like, what is the practice of anti-racism and what is the arts, doing about that? I'm super, super interested and really glad to have your feedback on this topic, but maybe you should just give us a little overview of what that even means.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's obviously a big thing right now. So over the past several months, this summer, I think the full arts industry has sort of had this moment of reckoning, and my job changed within that. So I work two places. I work at the American Repertory Theater in Harvard Square as the anti-racism engagement co-lead, which I can get into sort of what that means. And I'm also the director of people and culture at Brain Arts Org, which is a nonprofit based in Dorchester that provides art studios, artist opportunities, and advocacy for artists, particularly in Dorchester. So a lot of underrepresented communities. So very actually different work for the two of those, but those roles I took on over the summer. So before that, at the American Repertory Theater, I did community engagement. And I was in actually helped start our People of Color Affinity Group. And in June, we all got together, the affinity group got together and wrote a statement to the theater with sort of a list of demands, things that we wanted to see change. And it turns out a lot of other theaters that was happening as well. The full industry was really changing. And in response, I got to take on this role of anti-racism engagement, which it sort of changes every week that I'm doing the work. The theater is changing and the industry, like I said, is changing a lot. So it's a lot of working with staff, working with the affinity group. We do, education initiatives, we're reading books together, we're meeting together as a staff to talk about what does anti-racism mean, which I know, as you know, we're sort of defining that as a country every day. What does anti-racism really mean and look like and feel like? And in the arts especially, It's, who are we seeing on our stages? Which communities are we engaging with to bring them into the theater? How are we building relationships after they leave the theater? So it's a lot of really big questions, and the work changes. I love the work, but it's intense and it changes every day.
So let me recap. It sounds like you came into the American Repertory Theater. This is a world-class, famous institution with a long history. You came in as a building, you said community engagement and affinity groups, and somehow that transitioned into an explicit anti-racism practice. Um, was there an anti-racism coordinator prior to this? Like, how did the theater think about this?
So yeah, there was not, and I would say for most theaters that's the case. That we sort of thought anti-racism comes through the work we do, through the conversations we have about the shows, but there's not anyone on payroll just to deal with that, which I think we're learning as an industry is something that we need. We need someone who's just focused on that. We need policies that are explicitly about that. So we didn't have that before. It was sort of doing it inadvertently through my work in community engagement. A lot of that is, through anti-racism, learning about equitable relationship building and sharing resources. All that type of work falls under anti-racism. So it was an easy shift, but it came directly through my work creating and publishing that statement that the affinity group made.
That's pretty amazing thing for an affinity group to make a statement to a historically white institution or white-led institution like the ART. What was that like for you, that experience of pulling that together?
Yeah, it was an amazing process the way that we did it. It was fully collaborative and collective, and it really worked through the relationships we'd already had throughout the year. So we were able to just gather. I think we did it over the course of 2 or 3 days over Zoom, like 8-hour Zoom sessions. People would drop in, share stories. One person would type out while another was talking. It was surprisingly easy given how early it was in quarantine. We weren't used to working remotely, but we were used to holding space together, and we used that. So it was very intense to hear each person was sort of sharing their own struggles, what they wanted to see. It was very much written out of the hope for change. Like it was not, we weren't saying, we want to take down the theater, we want to see it suffer. We were like, these are things we think could happen. And we have published the statement on our social media channels, and since the theaters put it on their website and publicly acknowledged it. And we're going to be doing a 6-month review of the statement in December, actually, which is wild to think that it's been 6 months. But yeah, the writing of it was just this wonderful collaborative remote moment.
I've got to wish you luck with it. Is there anything else I need to ask you about the ART before I move on to brain arts?
I think we just started doing some virtual live streaming actually with local artists. It's called Virtually Oberon. So I would just plug that because we're getting into that space of putting shows on. It's obviously a really, really hard time for theater. But I'm really excited to see all the ways people are getting interesting and innovative.
So wait, do you mean that an artist, like an actor or actress, is on stage at the Oberon and like the we would view it from home? Is that what it is? I'm just
Yeah,
interested now.
yes. So
Sorry.
it's been like more concert style, but yeah, we have artists live streaming from Oberon, so there's no audience there. Um, but that just got started, and it's very exciting to see.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
Now I did a brief Google and like tried to inform myself about brain arts, but I think that maybe you can explain it a lot better than I can. And also if you can let me know about the organization and also how you came to be affiliated with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like I was mentioning a little before, it's a nonprofit based in Fields Corner in Dorchester. And our headquarters are it's called Dorchester Art Project. So it's this space where we have artist studios. So we have local artists who can rent a studio, have resources there. We have a theater space that people can book to live stream shows. And actually, just a few months ago, 2 months ago, we opened a storefront like on our first floor, so artists can sell their own work there. We have art supplies that people can rent, and that's really it's wild to open a storefront during COVID, but we did, and it's going really well. who are expanding in that way. And we do some advocacy work as well. So you'll see brain arts people at protests around the city, maybe sharing a speaker or giving artists opportunities. It's a lot of connection work.
Why do you care personally about the arts so much? What is it about you and the arts? Is it in your blood, in your family background? Did you study it? How did you become such an arts advocate?
Yeah, it's only been the past few years
Hmm.
that I've gotten into it. I'm from two artists. So my father is a jazz pianist. He teaches ear training at Berkeley. My mother was a ballerina for much of her life. So the arts are absolutely in my blood. And I had thought growing up that wasn't for me. I was like, oh, I'll go to shows. I love listening to music. That's great. But I actually, right before working at the ART, worked at the MIT Media Lab. So there was, I thought I was on a different path. I was studying technology. I was studying social media and how it's used in social movements. And I thought, that's great. I'm going to do that. And then I saw this job posted at the ART. And I thought, I really like community engagement and I like going to theater. I'm going to try this out. And it turns out that's what I love. And my parents knew what they were talking about.
That's straight up amazing. And how about yourself personally? Do you have an art of self-expression that you do that that you enjoy?
I I love dancing, but not professionally.
Uh,
And I've always loved to draw and paint, but nothing. I was never good enough to do it professionally, but I am more than happy to support artists and help them do their work. That I've found is my passion.
Now, I need to ask you, I'm sorry about the impact of the pandemic on all of this. It sounds like you have been making great strides. You've mentioned the 8-hour Zoom meeting. Um,
Yeah.
at some point, I expect our society to reopen and arts performances to start. But in the short term, what would you say are the greatest issues facing people of color in the arts during the pandemic, especially?
Yeah, we actually, I just had a meeting with our advisory board at Brain Arts yesterday, and we were talking about how I think one of the biggest things is the lack of permanent space that artists have, especially artists of color right now. I think for everyone, a lack of space is a huge problem to be able to afford space, have the resources to create your art. And I think that to me is really the biggest issue facing artists of color. It's always been true, but now it's really, really difficult for people to just survive and then beyond that have the supplies they need, just a studio space to be able to create work and sustain their work. So I think being able to at Brain Arts, being able to provide that to artists of color in particular is incredible, and it's so important right now.
And can they access those spaces during the pandemic?
Yes. We've adjusted our rules and we don't do shows in there anymore, but our tenants still have their space. We were able to actually provide some relief to our tenants for a while. We're always applying to grants and we always need more money than we have, but we have been really fortunate to be able to keep that space for our artists.
Amazing. And you mentioned the connection a little bit between brain arts and some social action, some direct social action. So is that like they'll go to a rally? The image I had is they'll go to a rally and draw pictures. Like what? How might it manifest itself? Like give me an example.
Yeah. So I should plug that it's the organization is run by two people, Sam Patricus and Emma Levitt, and they are super well connected activists, artists themselves. And they, through someone who they've just had a relationship with, will say, like, we're going here. They'll see on social media that people are showing up at this place, this rally, this protest, and they're super plugged in. And they'll show up. And, sometimes it is like Sam will bring his truck with a sound system and let the people running the rally just use that. And they show up. They are out there.
It's amazing to think about that. How are people using online resources right now to build community during the pandemic in terms of like the arts world, in terms of providing support? Is there like how's it happening and how and where?
Yeah. I mean, one, it's hard. People are getting more and more tired every day and having less and less, you know, to give. But through social media, especially, I think it's how people are finding opportunities. We'll share opportunities on our social media for artists, and share what they're working on. So we I know we're very active on social at Brain Arts, and I think that's been the primary way that people are staying connected online. But I always say, I think with social media, the point is to get people together in person. So that's really difficult right now.
That's
I'm
got to be a
hopeful.
challenge, right? This sec.
It's definitely a challenge and it's really hard. But social media is a really incredible tool.
What did you study like in order to get into this type of field? Like how did you navigate college, and what were you kind of, I'm interested in your background after leaving Brookline, and you said you came back right after college. What happened? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. So actually, it's perfect for this moment, but I studied digital justice was the name of my major. Um,
Wow.
it was, I went to a school where you could sort of make your own major and people were studying all these interesting, cool, wild things. So I thought I was actually in school during Occupy Wall Street and I was just down the street. I went to NYU and I thought, oh, what is this? What are people doing? How are all these people connecting, finding each other? Then Arab Spring happened, and I was so fascinated by that. So I decided to study that and make that my focus, and learn through that all of the limitations of using social media for social movements. It's something we've seen now, looking back at Occupy and Arab Spring. But it was just really the study of how can people connect with each other online, and how can they share and use resources through social media. So that's very relevant right now, I've found.
Digital justice. So what was one kind of class in digital justice? What would that look like? Like what can you just maybe explain, just because this is a wonderful term to me, but today's literally the first time I've heard the phrase digital justice. Sounds fabulous. I would love to know what that means, or like what one does in a digital justice class.
Yeah. Well, it should sound new because I made it up in college. So it was not anything that it wasn't a track that people could study. I just sort of combined, I was interested in the social justice and digital media. So I put those together. But I was studying, you know, media studies. I was studying political science. I studied web design. I did courses in colonialism and empire, understanding all of the ways that we construct social media, the way it looks different in other countries. So I was just all over an interdisciplinary major, but I put that together to create digital justice.
Wow. So I view anti-racism as people that are committing to dismantling systemic racism, sort of systems that exist to propagate um, racism, and so the practice of it, especially, like, I mean, you're working for like the ART. That's a very venerable arts organization with like long ties to Harvard and other elite institutions. Do you think it's harder for those institutions? I don't mean just the ART, but in general for these sort of larger institutions to understand that, the systems that have kept them in place, and what kind of messages have been effective in kind of reaching the leadership and helping them understand?
Yeah. I think it's always interesting because you have, the larger organizations, it's harder to change. Obviously, it takes a lot of time to build them up, but they're so well resourced that there is that great benefit where you think, all right, if we're deciding to do this, we are able to pivot and do it. We have the resources. We're not always fighting to survive necessarily. So there is that benefit, but it's definitely difficult to fight against, centuries of racism. And racism works because it's really hard to do anti-racism work. It's difficult. It takes a lot. So right now, I think because of the pandemic at the theater, our production stopped. And there's a great benefit of saying, okay, we can all just focus on changing the way that we're relating to one another, the way that we're doing work, and we can make it better and more equitable. So that's been that's what I've been doing there. That's all the meetings I've been in. I get to have one-on-ones with leadership all the time now, which I didn't have the opportunity to before in my position. So we're really changing in that way. But it's hard. It's hard to engage with these practices, these structures that have been in place for hundreds of years that we really want to change. So we're figuring it out right now, but it's definitely difficult. But I would say the leadership has been very open to these conversations.
How about artists themselves that, are they addressing any of this work directly, that you've seen, that addressing issues of race or exclusion or systematic racism or white supremacy or colonialism you mentioned before? Are these issues that you are noticing come out in people's art, whether it's on stage or whether it's in their visual art?
Yeah, I think so. I think artists who are able to create right now, which I know it's really hard for artists, and I know my focus is trying to provide those opportunities for artists, but it definitely is coming out. I know people are writing a lot. It's a little bit harder to put on shows, but we're seeing Zoom plays, and that's been happening. But I think we're going to see. I'm so curious to see in the coming years all the work that's going to come out of this, because it is outside of just the quarantine aspect. People are really grappling with these really intense issues that we didn't have the space as much to talk about, or we weren't listening as much as an industry, as a society. So yeah, there's a lot of work in this anti-racism realm that's being created right now, and it's incredible.
If people, this is going to air on Brookline Cable and, be available. If people want to, I don't know, kind of get involved in this, or, are there sort of groups around town that they should be joining, or there, where would they find a center of activism, or a few places you'd recommend? Normally, I would ask you where they should hang out or like in person, but right now I'm asking, like, are there any groups around Boston or places online where people might want to connect if they want to be supportive of anti-racism work in the arts in general?
Yeah, I think right now there's been a lot of like coalition building. So I
Mm.
think we're gonna start to see that being more public facing. I know a lot of it's actually been an amazing time for all the like local theaters and different arts nonprofits suddenly connecting with each other so much more. So we have, more like we have the theaters, we have small theaters, we have American Rep, we have amazing smaller theaters like Company One. These great groups like coming together and sitting down and talking about how we want to address these issues we have right now. So those, I think, I'm not thinking of like a specific group that's like published and come together yet, but I think we are going to see that. I would say in terms of arts activism, I do have to plug Brain Arts, and if you do go to our social media, we plug local arts activists constantly. You can see it on our Instagram, on our stories. We are always sharing, so that is an amazing resource to find great local arts activists in Boston, in the greater Boston area.
Great. And I don't want to pigeonhole you as the arts gal. Like, do you know what I mean? I know that you have a broader life outside of work, and that you're part of a broader community. But it is interesting to see that you said early in this discussion that you link a lot of this to things you learned at Brookline High School. And I'm interested. Can you maybe show a little bit of how some of those connections work, or like how that works for you personally?
Yeah, I think my biggest social justice education that really started in School Within a School, which I know you know very
SWS.
well, SWS. It was a phenomenal experience. I think I had that social justice drive in me, but I didn't have the words for it yet. I didn't have the resources. And going there, taking courses like individuals and institutions, and learning about the prison industrial complex, learning about the history of slavery, like suddenly I was having this amazing education that you don't really usually get in a public American high school. And I got to be on committees and just talk to people my age about issues that we were facing. This was a little bit before social media as we know it. So I think a lot of those conversations for kids are happening on social media now, which is great. But we got to just, every moment of the day was spent talking about these big important issues and learning about the historical context of a lot of the things I was experiencing and feeling, but was finding the words for. So it was just, SWS was the most amazing social justice education.
I'm glad that you feel that way. And, I feel the same way too. And I'm obviously older than you. I was SWS class of 1987. But I remember meeting you when I came into a SWS class in like 2008.
Yes.
Must have been your around then. Um, and SWS hadn't changed in its fundamentals. It looks different. It's a lot more like the desks, like the students sit at desks now. In my day, they were in couches.
Yeah.
Um, or like, yeah, we had couches. There was a bed in one of the classes, but the social justice angle has not changed one bit.
Yes.
And even the kids there today are super, super woke, super on top of things. I am excited that there's going to be a SWS 50th all-year reunion coming up in 2021, and I'm hoping that that there'll be a significant social justice component to that. I know I can count on you to help us out to get the tone right and everything,
Absolutely.
but I'm glad that you credit SWS. I too credit SWS with a lot of my thinking, my values, and some of those like long conversations that people had where it's not just on the surface, but really going deeper into issues kind of gave me a better foundation for later in life. I couldn't have imagined this circumstance that we're all in, but hopefully it gave me a good sort of moral framework to think about things.
Yeah. And I think just the autonomy that the school gives you and really respecting teenagers and wanting to hear their opinions, it's so formative. And I still think back to things I learned in class and use those things in my work.
How did you get an SWS in the first place? A lot of kids get to Brookline High and they don't even know about that program until they're like senior year, and then it's too late.
Yeah, no, I was so lucky. My older sister was an SWS. I
Fabulous.
actually waited until she graduated so we didn't overlap, so I could be independent, which has worked great for SWS. But it's true. It's really easy to miss. It's so small. It's upstairs, and I'm so glad that I went. I can't imagine what I would be doing if I didn't go.
Awesome. Well, Julia, before I let you go, is there anything I didn't ask today that I should have, or anything else that you want to make sure people are aware of right now?
I would say I feel like you did a wonderful job, and thank you for having me. We didn't talk about this, but next week, I'm not sure when this will air, but next week is a really intense week. So I obviously encourage everyone to vote. And I've been talking with my affinity group and other people that it's a really hard time for people of color next week, especially. So encouraging for the people of color, encouraging everyone to take space, take a breath, ask for what you need, and for white allies to reach out to folks of color and show up and support in any way.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time and your enthusiasm.